Welcome to the Touching into Presence podcast.
This podcast is for people who are interested in bodywork, empowerment, and somatic-based practices.
I am Nikki Olson.
I'm Andrew Rosenstock.
We are certified Rolfers.
Collectively, we're trained in various movement and bodywork therapies with an emphasis on somatic awareness and client resilience.
Through conversations, our goal is to share and explore mind-body paradigms to offer empowerment possibilities.
Today's conversation is with Russell Stolzoff. Russell is a practitioner, researcher, and member of the Dr. Ida Roth Institute's advanced faculty. He's been a practitioner for the past 31 years, has served on numerous boards and committees for the Institute. His research at Western Washington University examined the effects of structural integration on soccer athletes and was presented at the International Fascia Research Congress in 2018 and 2015. In 2011, Russell formed Stolzoff Sportworks to bring the benefits of Rolfing structural integration to professional athletes. We'll talk about Russell's history of getting into Rolfing, the Rolfing education process, how psychology fits in, working with professional athletes, and why to go further into advanced certification. And there's more as well. We had some technical difficulties at some points, which you may hear, but we managed to get through it okay. I always enjoy talking with Russell, as he is someone who clearly thinks about not just what to say, but also how to listen and respond in a way to meet the person where they're at. So with that, let's begin our talk. How are you today, Russell?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing pretty good.
Pretty good.
Good.
So if it's cool, why don't we start, I guess, a little by your history about what brought you to Rolfing and bodywork, and
Sure.
Then we'll move along from there.
Sure. Yeah. So what how did I get into Rolf? How did I find Rolfing?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, sure. Well, I think it was by accident and maybe by good luck at the same time. I was a student at CU, University of Colorado, studying sociology and economics and English, and I really had it was at a time where education was still affordable enough to where you could actually go to college and not know what you were going to do afterwards, or not have any idea, and that sort of fit me, and I struggled in college just to kind of find my way, and but I was doing it, and then part of what helped me was that I was having some difficulties emotionally, and I got into therapy about halfway through, found a really good psychologist, and worked with her at the university weekly, and I started to understand myself, I think, as a young adult, and some of the tough experiences that I had growing up. I lost my father at a young age, and that, I think, that had a real big impact on me, and then I had also been all my focus had been kind of into athletics, and when I went to CU, I took a hiatus from competitive sports, and I didn't know if I was going to go back to it or not, and I think that so my identity was kind of wrapped up in being athletic, and then I was away from home, and then all of a sudden, my world just kind of fell apart, and I couldn't concentrate and didn't know what I wanted to do, and so all of that is to say that I was starting to get things back on track, and one of my housemates, I was living in a basement apartment, and one of my housemates was training at the Roth Institute, and she was European, and she also had people from Europe who were coming to the Roth Institute that would stay with her, and so I would encounter Rolfers who came to town, and so at one point they said, "Oh, you should come, and we need people to get Rolfed, and you should come." And I had no idea what it was, but I had a friend in California who had mentioned it to me, so I kind of heard it, or I don't know if I remember if I knew about it, but I said to her, "Hey, my crazy neighbor wants me to go do this thing called Rolfing. You want to come?" She's like, "Oh, that would be amazing for you. You remember that time we were walking on the beach and I watched how you were walking, and I said, with the way your legs move, I don't know how you go forward." And, and I said, "Yeah, I remember. I've been self-conscious about that ever since." And she said, "That'll be great." And so that was kind of the encouragement that I got to try Rolfing. I'd never even had a massage before. And this was in 1983, and I was 22 years old. And so I went to be a model in this class. It was back at the old institute in the skylight room. They had a small little room. They had 8 people in a class. And
that was the one at the end of Canyon, right? Going up
right.
the mountains? Yeah.
No, not at the end. It was the one at 3rd and Pearl.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was before the one in Canyon. So it was the original place where, the Roth Institute settled in Boulder. And it was pretty weird, but it was cool. And I mean, it was just, I think if that hadn't have it changed the course of my life. And it gave me, for the first time, something that I could begin to have an interest in doing. And of course it wasn't right away because I was still finishing college, but it was, the experience was so profound, and it was profound on multiple levels. It was I would say it was psycho-emotional, as well as physical, and the way that those things came together, because it made me understand my experiences in psychotherapy. I remember it made me reflect that I would feel things in my body, but it wasn't a body-focused therapy. So I could feel my body responding to the therapy, but it was subtle. And then when I got Rolfed, it freed me up physically, and that kind of dovetailed with the emotional changes that I've been experiencing. So that, I think, that made a very profound impact. And I finished college and I went and lived in Europe for a year, and there wasn't very much that you could find about, there was Dr. Rolf's book, and that was about it. And I got my hands on some other kind of somatic literature, whatever I could find, I started reading about. And then when I came back from Europe, I passed through Boulder and had an interview, found out what was involved in being able to apply and so forth and so on. Then I went off and studied, at that time they didn't have a phase 1 program. And so they were just beginning this thing they called comprehensive studies, which was a way to learn the things that they teach in phase 1. It was a precursor to phase 1, or foundations of somatic practice. It's been called different things. But the way most people prepared to go to the Roth Institute was they took courses at colleges and universities. That's what I did. I went and did a year of college anatomy, physiology, neuroanatomy, physiology, kinesiology, and I went to massage school. And then, so it took me about a little over a year to prepare, and I applied. So, it stuck with me. So I think I didn't end up going to my first auditing until 1987. So I got Rolfed in 83, and I remember going to my, back then we had an interview. It was a 2-day, you'd write this big paper, And then you make the application, you'd write a big paper, the paper had to be accepted. Once that was accepted, then you get a 2-day interview. And the 2-day interview had a committee. Part of it was a group interview where they kind of observed you. And the second part was this individual interview where you'd go before what they called the selection committee. And there were like 8 people, and I remember going to that, and of course everybody was really nervous. And I remember meeting people that had been rejected or told, the old stories they tell people, you have to go off and do this or do that, or come back, you're not ready yet. So I didn't know those stories then, but I met people that had wanted to be Rolfers and told, no, you're not ready yet for whatever reason, right or wrong. And they came back like 8 years later. Like they still wanted to be a Rolfer 8 years later. 8
years later?
Yeah, there was like one person that I met. I've never forgotten it. So
some dedication.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of what drove me into it.
And that's someone you really, if they have that much dedication, you better let them in. Otherwise, your building is burning down.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, she got in at that point, so 8 years later. So whatever was lacking previously wasn't then. So, yeah.
So did you get in on the first try?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. My interview was really easy. I was super surprised. Like they didn't really have they didn't throw any curveballs at me or anything, it was like, I think I was basically in. But the one thing they asked me was, once you're a Rolfer, what do you plan to do? How do you see yourself? What do you see yourself doing after you become a Rolfer? I said, well, I see myself starting a practice somewhere. They said, well, we see you've traveled around a lot. You've been, do you plan to like stay in one place? Or I said, well, yeah, I plan to set up shop, and the feedback was that we think you need to do that. You're going to need to sink into it, don't continue just moving around like you have been. So I think that was good advice.
That I'm not sure how much Russell, but I mean that's essentially what I've been doing for the last 10 years is moving all around, and I've been in the process of trying to find a place to settle down. And I know from my Rolfing practice, being in one place and just settling down and working is the most ideal. And so your words are hitting me very like at a place of deep.
Good. Well, I just don't, I think it's the kind of practice where you have to have a lot of repetition to be able to understand what it can do and to come up against the challenges that you will come up against when you work with people, because people are different. They're different ages. They're different, different types of inhabiting of their physicality and it just seems to me like in order to really become proficient, you need to have a lot of repetition and I think that the brilliance of the way that we teach Rolfing in terms of teaching it in a form that people can be introduced to and then go practice gives a structure to being able to notice, how people are similar and different and over time. And then what happens as you go through those steps with people, how their bodies change. And therefore what you can expect from the work we do and how you can communicate that to people such that after a while, you kind of know you don't know exactly what's going to happen, but you know sort of what's going to happen when you work with someone. But in the beginning, you really don't. And I think
just a little editing note. We had a little technical difficulty, which I shaved out to save you minutes of hearing us trying to figure out how to talk to each other. And now let's get back to the talk.
Did he freeze on your end?
Yeah, we may have just lost.
Oh, there you
there
go.
we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
You just want to give me. You want to give me extra editing work. I appreciate it.
Where did I stop? Where did my recording stop? We don't know.
No, you are, because I was agreeing with you a great deal. You were talking about how with the training, how it's beneficial to have that time to, like how it was in the past and not so much how it is now, have that time to be able to mentor and work with people and really get to understand the different types of bodies, where they're coming from, mental backgrounds, physical backgrounds, and how that experience really prepares you for practice.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I feel, from my little bit of experience, and I'm sure you can speak greatly to this, being able to compare when I went through my training, I had that opportunity to do an internship and just kind of get my feet wet a little bit in the kind of real world experience, and then go back to the Institute and have support in the phase 3 for the clinical work. I was able to enter it with a little bit of confidence, but then also from the mentorship, have real life questions and be able to bring that into the classroom and work with that. And so right. I can see from teaching in the phase 1 and then assisting in the phase 2, didn't ever assist in phase 3, but with the nervousness that the students had after finishing phase 2 and be like, oh my gosh, I have to turn around and then start working on people. I think that some of the people got to enter in that with a little less nervous because they have a massage background or some bodywork background. But for the people who really had no touch experience, I felt it was unfortunate because they went in with a lot of extra nervousness that if they could just have sat back and been able to take 1 or 2 people through a 10 series.
Right. You mean like in a mentorship?
Yeah, in a mentorship.
Yeah. Well, the training, no matter how you slice it, I feel like even if you had a year, the problem is that in the break, you're not, we always had this thing in the faculty where it's like, oh no, we need this, people need this time, they're integrating, it's like in today's educational world, and especially when there's student loans involved, they don't understand integration. They don't know, what that means. And we're pretty hard put to say what we know, in concrete terms that we know what it means either. We just have been doing it this way. And so things are a little bit different now. And I think reflecting back on my own experience, there were people, it wasn't advised at that time either that you go from your auditing to your practicing right away. And there were people, but part of the reason is that in the practicing phase, which is kind of like the phase 3, back then we were also Rolfing each other. So we were Rolfing each other and then Rolfing our outside of class clients at the same time. And in the auditing phase, we weren't doing any hands-on work to speak of. So I think it was a little overwhelming for students to be doing that. It's hard to say what causes what, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that no matter how you slice it, the training is really short. And even if you put time in between the phases, the idea of you've had roughly 6 months of education And then you're going to go out and start a practice, and you're going to be holding yourself out there as a person who knows enough of what they're doing to be able to help someone in the way that delivers what the claims are.
Well,
and I think it's scary. It's just scary for most people.
I think this suggestion came out from the early days, maybe even something Ida Rolf said. I don't know the exact quote, but it was something that I feel like was reiterated constantly in my training is, yes, you'll be certified, but the real training starts when you build your practice. In the next 5 years is when you're really learning. You got the tools, you're able to kind of tread the waters safely, but
right. It's amazing to me that with that short education that you can come out with tools that you really can help people and that you do help people. I think that that's amazing, and so I always try to encourage students in my classes at that end of phase 3 period, or even in phase 2, like you're going to be ready to go do this and you're going to be able to help people. It's going to, you're not going to, and you can't ever be further along than where you are. So, so that's, but, you have to have, ideally, you come out of that basic level of training experience with enough confidence to begin. And then, of course, like you're saying, you learn as you go, and experience teaches you. And I think that's.
I'm a bit of a devil's advocate kind of guy, so I always listen and then have this sort of other sense. And I think
cool.
I think of like, okay, yoga training, a basic yoga training. You have 200 hours of yoga training, of which maybe you have maybe if you're lucky, 20 hours of very, very basic anatomy, and you're thrown out into the world to help people, right? Massage based in some states is 500 hours, which is still less than the Roth Institute. And on the other side, you have, like, if you're an osteopath, you have 3 to 5 years based on where you're studying in the respective country. So
right.
Big differences.
Right.
In that, my mind goes there more because I've been on some threads with yoga teachers trying to help people, and I'm being like, you've got 200 hours of training, and very well, you may have gotten more in that 1 hour of training than someone will get in 20 hours of training. It's hard to compare an hour to an hour in topics, but like so much of what people have is a bit, well, is it enough? Is it ever enough? And I agree with you a lot that there isn't the basic training in some ways. Maybe, yeah, it's a great way to get, like you said, enough to here, do this, and you're going to need more later on. But for now, like, start, and you're going to actually learn so much on that path.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's always, some people can spend, 5 years learning something and not be able to work very well with it, at the end. So I'm not trying to say that number of hours or years spent is the only factor in, how you learn.
No, I don't think you are. I kind of want to put some parallels out there, but I couldn't really tie them back together.
No, I think you did. I think you did.
Well, I have a question in terms of what you shared in your experience when you first got started, or were you mentioning, so I was kind of holding on to the thought that during college you experienced going to see a psychologist, mm-hmm. and how that might have influenced how you perceived or received your Rolfing experience when you volunteered as being a client. Because after I got certified, I know it kind of says around in the training, you kind of track the people that are gonna maybe put you to your edges, or what you might need to work on. And so soon, when I was fresh out of school, starting my practice, I was like, oh my God, I need to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist because the clients are they're triggering me. And I was like, I know enough about therapeutic framework that I need to make sure my stuff is checked. So I'm curious in the training, if something could be reintroduced into the training that isn't already there. And for you having so many years of teaching, what kind of class do you think could be there to help support the development of I don't know how to best say it, to meet the psychological needs of being ready enough as the practitioner and then be able to handle it, what comes our way in practice? Because I think the way the phase 2 is when the clients or the students are receiving the work, there is that like great embodiment. Everybody's a little chaotic, so I could definitely see how that could be very disorienting as receiving it and then doing it to outside clients. So that kind of blend of the phase 2, phase 3. But yeah, I know that I needed that. I've seen students going through the process. It's kind of like, that learning contract is a lot of like, hey, what's that thing going on for you that maybe needs to be looked at?
Yeah, you're touching on, I think, some things that are really important, and there's a lot I could say about it. I think that, I mean, the first word, like you're asking about, how could the training incorporate more in this relational realm, or help Rolfers to be more or relationally sophisticated or psychologically sophisticated, or understand the implications of what they're doing, or how they could be, what kind of responses their clients could have. It's, if I'm understanding you correctly, and the thing that comes back to me immediately is time, because there again, and we struggle with this on the faculty. We're always trying to like jam more things in to less time. And in some ways there really isn't time. You're trying to learn, unless you really change you de-emphasize something else. And our tradition has been, the fundamental thing we're trying to teach people is how to do the 10 series in the basic training. That's the fundamental thing. And you have to get through that. And that takes up most of the time. And then there's also, we've added things into that over time. Like we've added movement work into it over time because it's so important. But you start adding other things into it, and then these things are in and of their own right. They're huge, vast fields where you could spend your whole life understanding how to work with somebody this way. So then the question becomes, what's important for someone, a Rolfer at the beginning level, to know and how to relate to. And I think we try to cover that, but everybody comes in a different place. We're not really, right. We don't assume, they're sort of, we don't know where they are in their personal life. We don't know what they're like characterologically or emotionally, or, if they struggle with mental illness or things like this. And so, of course, all of that affects how to be a practitioner. But that's just kind of like on the theoretical level, but I want to say something personally about that issue, which is when I finished my Rolfing training, my first basic training, and I went to work and I started to try to go to work with people, the thing that was most confronting to me was that I didn't that I knew I had my hands on more than just structure, but I didn't know how to relate to people about it. And that was, and that made me feel really nervous in a way. Like I was really cool with the mechanical, the biomechanical side of things. And yet I'd come from this place where the effect had been so kind of like mixed up. It was whole body, it was whole person kind of effect of Rolfing. That's what made me want to be a Rolfer. But I didn't really have the skills to know how to handle, each person as an individual have any kind of assessment about where they were, what their capacities were, how much to, how to engage with them on the relational level for a therapeutic purpose. And so that led me off into kind of a few directions that initially I studied with Peter Levine. I was in his first somatic experiencing training. And then I, through that, discovered the Bodynamic Institute in Denmark, and I studied for 5 years. I did a somatic psychotherapy training program with them that lasted 5 years, included therapy, supervision.
I can
pretty
relate
intensive.
To that greatly.
And then I went to graduate school and did about half of a master's degree before I realized, look, I don't think I want to be a therapist. I just want to be a better Rolfer. And that's when I kind of doubled down on Rolfing and decided that, but all of that training really helped me. And in a sense, I learned something. One key phrase that I think, which is that the psychological theories of therapy have is this idea of how the practitioner, what is the role of the practitioner for the therapeutic benefit of the client. And I think that is something where there is probably some room in our education to get more, to nail that down a little bit more, to articulate it a little bit more, so that you have what psychology calls the therapeutic use of self. So how you use yourself in the Rolfing relationship to help the person in the way that you're doing, in Rolfing. You're not trying to be their psychotherapist. You're not trying to, but there is a therapeutic use of self in the Rolfing context that I think benefits clients. And I think the more that you are deliberate, can develop something that's deliberate, and you practice it, then I think you become, that goes together with all the other skills that you have as a practitioner to help your client.
Yeah. My longest practice was in New York City, and I was seeing a Jungian therapist for myself. But as, I just kind of moved to New York on a whim. So as my practice was building, I had already developed this relationship with this Jungian therapist. And over time, it was interesting because she then became kind of my soundboard when I brought things to her from that was coming up in my Rolfing practice about people and their kind of psychological needs. And I'm like, I need help, so in a way she was kind of my mentor in helping to navigate the psychological things that came up with working with the bodies. And, it's interesting because in the training, a lot of it's like we're working on bodies, it's the kind of the side product or a result, but it's not what we're aiming for is, they might have some kind of psychosomatic experience. And that's why I asked that question of what do you think we could add in the training that could help foster what comes up. I mean, I live in Boulder, and so it's still very fascinating for me when I meet people. And when I have a good friend that she was like, I've always wanted to get Rolf, but she's like, I'm just not in the mood to start crying all the time. And or it's the other one of like, oh, I want to get Rolf, but it's so painful. So these ideas of what we do, which is true, but it's not all of it. It's like some of it. And some people might have this, transformative experience in more of the way they're living the world and not how they're moving in the world.
My standard question back to people, they say, oh, I hear Rolfing is can be a really emotional process. I say, well, are you a really emotional person? In your day, it's not likely to make you emotional if you're not emotional. And if you are emotional, then you experience things emotionally anyway. So probably Rolfing will connect to your emotions and more than for the person who doesn't experience themselves that way. It's kind of simple, really.
Yeah, We had a call last week with Jan, and we had actually a similar talk going on in the group, which is sort of like, I think someone wanted to have more of the emotional support for their clients, especially now with what's happening in the world and not being able to be there physically. And the answer I sort of heard was really similar to what you said, which is that in the basic training, you're trying to teach the container of the recipe, right? And to teach what that is. And then from there, you can learn more and apply it. And it's not that the psychology doesn't apply. It's just that you have, like you said, you only have time. And if you put something in, what do you have to take out? And for me, I remember in my, I don't know if it's in phase 1 or phase 2, I've always been excited about where does the mind and the body meet. And I remember talking to some of my classmates wanting to go there and them being like, no, we only want physical. And I'm being like, no, there's clearly so much more. And I remember in this, the teaching assistant was working on someone in phase 2. And on the first day, I just remember looking at her and having this visceral feeling of how much anger is in this person. And I remember talking to someone and no one, they thought I was crazy. And on session 5, when she burst and this anger came through, I remember thinking like, this is, what I was seeing, but how can I work with that? And I think my understanding, and I'm the youngest out of all of us, is sort of like what you said, Russell, is like you do the basic training and then you study more. And it's the annoying thing is like you spend all this money, all this time to get this thing, and then you need to study more. But I'm not on faculty. I don't know another way to do anything with that. I don't know how you can.
The only other way is to make the training longer.
Right.
And that's not a new idea, but I mean, essentially what we're talking about is something that, could be built into like a 2-year course of study. It could be a master's degree kind of a thing. It's like where you have enough time to explore in enough depth all the dimensions that would expose you to more and try to incorporate that into your learning in one fell swoop, but that's not where we are.
No, and I think that's why they have the continuing ed, of which is you can have, some people want to go down the somatic experiencing route and they can do that and have that as their CE and then bring it in, and others really don't. And while the three of us might find it like really helpful, I find it some way more helpful than the physical. Others may not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm really, I don't know if I'm at a point or if it's just my orientation is, I really don't think I like the fact that it's open-ended enough to allow each practitioner's interest for them to nurture their own interests. Some people are just maybe, sports performance oriented or pain. They're after pain reduction or, whatever. Some people want to take it more in a trauma direction. They can do that. Some people want to take it more long-term kind of characterological effects of the structure, and you can do that. But each one of those things is kind of like its own branch off the trunk, if you will.
Well, you've done a great job with helping bringing the Rolfing into the athletics. You worked with I'm terrible at team sports, the Seahawks.
Yeah, several Seahawks. Yeah, good one. Yeah. So,
with your contribution of working with them, that definitely gave us a nice push into how Rolfing can benefit high performance athletes.
Yeah, it was fun to see. Part of the reason I produced some of those little videos, it was a little tricky to get some, it's always touchy. Our work is confidential, right? So it was a little bit of it took some I had to bargain with myself, I guess is the way to say it. Maybe the way to say it best is to try and, create a proposal where some of the people that I was working with, ask them if they would be willing to be public about their experience. But it's something that we've always chased from a PR standpoint. And I know, and part of the reason I went into it was because I really felt like Rolfing has something to offer performance athletes. And if you could get people who, and I know there's a lot of high performance athletes that are getting Rolfing, there's just not that many of them are being public about it. And, if you could get them to say what their experience was, that it would be a good thing for us as a whole. And I think, so it was fun to see with those little videos, how widely they got shared. They really went around the world.
So from your experience, what do you think the greatest benefit has been for working with, besides the PR part, with working with the high performance athletes? What do you think their greatest gain has been?
Well, mostly I've worked with professional football players. I've worked with some other professional athletes too, but I feel most comfortable speaking about the football players. And
that's American football players for our listeners overseas.
Yeah, NFL. Yeah, right. Not soccer. Although, I've been trying to get into soccer, but that's another story. Anyway, I think for them, I'm thinking back to this little video that Golden Tate made. He played for the Seahawks. I don't know. I think he's playing with New York Giants now, maybe. But he was on that team that won the Super Bowl. And I think one of the things he said was maybe says it best was, that they have a long season and they get beat up every week. And then once you kind of understand the cycle, it's like, they have a game, then they try to rest, recover, get treatment, and get ready for the next week. And a lot of times you can see, if you follow the season at all, who's going to win at the end of the season has to do with who has the healthiest players. And so it's staying in the game. And that was the tagline of the business we formed, Stolzoff Sportworks, stay in the game. That was our tagline. Because, they have to be out there they have to be healthy to be out there. And staying healthy is what, and he said something in that video where he said, even though it's like the 16th week of the season, I still feel fresh. And Rolfing's been a part of that. It's not everything he does, but it's contributed. And then there was another thing where he's a wide receiver. So he talked about how he felt like his starts off the line of scrimmage were quicker and crisper and things like that. So both the performance and the recovery and those things, what we also called prehab, I think that those are some of the contributions that Rolfing has to make for athletes at any level. But when you've got these guys who are doing it professionally and they've got everything riding on it and they're speaking about it, then I think it's a good recommendation for the work.
Were you doing 10 series, or were you doing more like spot work in between?
Ooh, That's a good question. Let's say this.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I could work with them enough,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that we accomplished a 10 series.
That's fair enough.
You know, if we work with the same, because that perspective that's embedded in the 10 series is my perspective.
Totally.
Yeah, and so like even if it's like, you know, and every time they're gonna say what they want to have worked on, just like your clients who come to you who aren't athletic, they're coming in with their problem, and in some ways, I feel like that's a particular skill. You know, how do you still keep your Rolfing vision, address what the person is coming in wanting help with, but yet also saying like, look, I know you're going to be better if we also address what I see, and the way to do that is to work with the goals that are embedded in the 10 series. So how you accomplish that, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that, you know, I think the longer you're in practice, the less you have to take it that way. You know, it keeps you on the track in the beginning, but you know, once you've been going a long time and you understand how it all works together, you can mix it up some.
Well, I guess that's a great answer. And my sort of thought was thinking more of what little I know of football players and head injuries, and thinking, are you ending all of your sessions you're doing with them? Are you ending with head and neck work and with and sacrum work? And my thinking being, are they as refreshed and ready to go at the beginning of the week? Partly because of that aspect of getting that sort of touch as well.
It's hard to know, you know. I can't work without treating both ends of the spine at the end, you know, sometimes during, sometimes at the beginning, but definitely at the end of the session, you know, so everybody gets neck work. I finish just about every session I ever do with sacral, with my hand on the sacrum for one reason or another. And so, yeah, I don't, and as far as, it's just hard to know why people get the benefit they get, you know.
Right.
It's
well, I think you kind of answered it with your tagline of meeting the holism. Like in New York City, I worked with all types of people, but there was a kind of a group of people I worked with were more of the weekend warrior athletes. So these were high driven corporate people, and they had I was part of their kind of team. They had their person that helped them work on, a lot of them were the triathlete types, but they had coaches for everything. And somehow, and I ended up being called this, but I was considered like the off-season coach, because
awesome.
I liked it because I got to have this dialogue with these other specialists, and there was this kind of always report of, hey, I'm working, this person needs speed, this is what I need, this performance out of this body part, but it's clearly not moving as well. What can you do? And so it was really cool to kind of be part of this. And then whenever I do dip into, you know, watching the Super Bowl or whatever popular sport is in season, watching it, and I just purely watch it from a human performance.
Me too.
I know nothing really about rules and things like that, but I'm like, if I were to work on this person, this is, you know. So coming back to like, would you do a 10 series or not? I think the beauty, and you said it really well, of when you understand the principles of Rolfing, you can still hold the essence of it while doing a non-formulistic session. And I think that's the greatest gift of the 10 series, is that you don't have to hold someone to a 10 series to get the benefit. You can really meet the needs by working with the principles.
Yeah, I think the thing that I try to emphasize, or I have tried to emphasize with the professional athletes, is this is a method that benefits multiple sessions. You know, your benefit increases the more that you do it, and that is something that I very consciously emphasized, because, well, to the extent that I was afraid, that they were looking for immediate change, I felt it was important to let them know that whatever change they might feel from a single session or in the beginning, would be augmented by continuing and having a chance to work through more of the body than just what we could do in 1 or 2 times. And that's easy to understand. I think but you have to produce some noticeable effect, even in the first one, in order to sort of, for me to stay in the game with them, it has to be impactful enough to where they can notice something and feel like it's worthwhile to continue. And I don't think it's that different from anybody that we work with. I feel like maybe it's a little bit taboo to talk about it as sales, but I feel like I've always felt this way in my practice. Like if I can meet someone in person and then they can try a session, then they're going to feel what it's about. And whatever I said will be translated into their experience somehow, whatever I did. And then that forms the basis of, them helping them to decide whether they want to continue or
not. Well, as a newcomer, I mean, coming straight out of training and then having to sell a 10-pack essentially,
right,
is daunting. I know I got really comfortable not doing the 10 series right away because I was like, I just need to get people in my office, like the marketing aspect of getting someone in here. Well, first I know you're complaining about your feet, but I'm going to work on your breath first.
And I would say, that has to do, I completely agree. It's daunting. And about 5 years ago or so, I created an apprenticeship in my practice, and I advertised for a recent graduate, and I was more than lucky. This woman applied, and we met, and she seemed great. And she'd been working for maybe about a year, was trying to get her practice going, and was having she was bound to be successful anyway. But she came, and I don't know, for her, it was, 10 series was what it was. Matter of fact, this is what we do. And she was so comfortable putting it out there that I learned something about that, 20 some odd years into it, I was like, wow, she doesn't have any doubts, and she just says it and people go, okay. So, it's like our own anxieties, and I think, you just tell people what the program is, they can take it or leave it,
Yeah, but I think I relate a lot to what you say about, I can describe a lot of it, right? But I get lost in words. I think words are maps for other things. That's what language is. And when you feel something, for a lot of times, if I talk to people, if I just say a little too much, I lose them. But if I've never met someone and they get on the table, they come back because the experience, there isn't, to the best of my experience, my knowledge, my offering, a way to use the words to explain what is going to happen. And I can conceptualize it, but it still becomes a concept and not that feeling. But when the work happens, work happens. And but there was something you sort of said. I was thinking about how you were talking about that lady being at your place and you being 20 years into the game and still learning. And I think that's something really nice about you, is that, and it goes back to something we were talking about at the beginning, sort of about mastery, right? I think mastery is the ability to not know everything and to say, okay, I know this really well, and you're giving me this. How does that fit in? And I think it's, I want to say Malcolm Gladwell. I'm not sure if it's the 5,000 hours or the 10,000 hours of, that thing that makes you a master. I know that I'll let you sort of take it from there if you want. I'm kind of feeding off the top of my head into what you were saying earlier, but that's how it all is kind of fitting into my brain right now.
Yeah. Is there a question there?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes when I email Nikki, I have to end it saying like end of thought, so she knows where I'm kind
it's
of.
all good. I think it's a great topic. And I mean, I was thinking, one of the things I was thinking as you were talking is like, I think in some ways, like, it's kind of like what your drive is, what are you trying, like for me, I just want to be the best Rolfer I can be. And I don't, I at this point, well, there's so many thoughts going around in my head, like I remember when I took my advanced training in Rolfing, the statement that the advanced teachers were putting out at that time was that the advanced training is designed to take you to bring you to a place where the work starts to become your teacher. So it's kind of implicit in that statement is the idea that this kind of marks the formal end of your Rolfing training, but that the idea that you will have what you need to know what you need to learn by who comes into your practice, that. And I don't think it's any different in the beginning, but in the beginning, you're focused on the fundamentals. It's like if you were a musician, you were like learning your scales, you're learning music theory, you're learning, all the things that it takes to become proficient. And at some point you are proficient and you're trying to still get better. And I feel like, that's how I sort of see myself, is like, I just always want to get better at what I'm doing, and I think that there's enough the space of the work is big enough to kind of probably never completely feel like there isn't anything left to learn. Like it's always going to be. If you're staying in touch with it, it's like there's always going to be more learning. But I think the increments get smaller, like the ahas are not they don't create as big a splash as maybe they once did or something,
I'm going to ask a personal question. You don't have to answer it. Just sort of what I'm wondering is, the sense to always want to be better. I think, I'm there as well. And I think that's great. Are you also comfortable with as good as you are right now?
Well, that's a good question. I'm more comfortable than I've ever been with who I am right now. I mean, professionally, I feel like I'm in a good space. I feel confident in my work, and that's a great feeling. It's it's like it took a long time to get to confidence, I think, to where, like I said earlier, like you don't really know what's going to happen for each person, but you've basically been around, you kind of know the kinds of things that are going to happen when you work with someone, and you can help them know what to expect, not that you're sort of defining what their experience is going to be in any way, but you just, and that's a great, that's a nice feeling to have when you're doing something, so hopefully I'm answering your question.
Yeah, more so.
But I'm also kind of restless, I get restless with myself, and it's like, I think I'm inherently kind of competitive, not just with others, but like with myself, and not in a bad way. It's not like I want to, it's not like I want to beat you, or be the best all the time, the only one, or that kind of thing. It's more of like a drive toward continuous improvement that I have kind of like in my life and my orientation towards life.
Russell, I'm curious, would you be able to name or identify any of those steps to growth or to confidence along your journey? Because we were talking maybe offline or a little bit before when you were talking about working with the Seahawks or the high level athletes, that there was kind of this maybe place of like, well, am I at that level where they are professionally to be working with them? And clearly you were or are, because they kept on coming back and you're getting great results. But I think that something would be great to share for other listeners, whether they're rolfers or practitioners or just people in their life, to be able to recognize where we can grow or what benchmarks that are identified with growth.
It's a really good question, and it's something I'm really interested in. I'm interested in the topic of what are the constituent parts of the trajectory of learning and becoming proficient and mastering the art, if you will. It's something that I don't know that I can define it for everyone. I think that there are certain things concisely I could say. In the beginning, it's practice and repetition. It's numbers, it's repetitions. It's like, it's like if you don't get the repetition, like, for example, if you, just to pull one example, like if you don't practice the 10 series, then you don't really know what the 10 series can do. You don't really, you won't come up against the limitations of it. You won't come up against your limitations within it. And so in the beginning, it's kind of like a form. And the old recommendations were like, yeah, don't study anything else. Don't go out there and like I didn't personally follow that, but I see the wisdom of it. I couldn't follow it because I didn't have the tools to just stay in the box, with just Rolfing. I didn't have all the tools I needed. So I went out and got some tools, brought them back in. And then I was like, okay, I'm more comfortable in the box now. And I can work on the Rolfing. And then like by the time it took me, because I was doing all those other things, it took me 8 years to go do my advanced training. So I went and did my advanced training. And when I went in there, I thought, what's this advanced training? It's not going to really, I think I've kind of explored where the limit is. I know where the limit is, and I went in my advanced training and I was like, holy shit, the limit isn't where I think it thought it was. And it sort of pointed the way for me. And I seriously, in all honesty, say for the next 10 or 11 years, I felt like I was running off of, and to some extent, I still am running off of the orientation of that presentation that I got in my advanced training. And then it's just I studied with Michael Salveson. And so at that point in time, it was just like, okay, well, it's going to take a long time because there's a lot of the body here. I have to get better at a lot of different things, and they're not all the same, and then if you include into that, I think the legitimate things that hang on this is, some like we've spoken about, some orientation to how you use yourself, relationally. Also, the other things that hang on to this are some familiarity and proficiency in sort of the cranial, visceral, and now I think you can add to that the nerve, peripheral nerve, if you want, manipulations. Those things I think belong squarely within the domain of Rolfing, and then it's just like continuing to use these things, to figure out when you need to do what. And just really, another thing I've thought and said a number of times is that, becoming a good Rolfer favors people who can kind of problem solve on their own. because we don't have we have now more than ever with Facebook and everything, this kind of collegial, ability to consult with each other. But for, years, everybody was just kind of figuring it out by themselves. And I still think at the end of the day, you do have to do that. You have to figure out, how you're doing it, because it's just you and your client in the room, So, I think I don't know if I'm answering your question that well, but I think that it's staying with it and all the way and not, not bleeding it out into something else that, isn't really about it. Or if you do, how do you bring it back?
So the confidence, well, yeah, I was just wondering if there's anything in particular, but it just sounds like, especially what you're sharing with your experience of going to advanced training, feeling like you're pretty, like, what are you going to learn? You've spent a lot of time learning. That really, the growth does come with the inquiry or staying open to, there's always something more to learn. We're always going to have those pockets within our, if you're desiring to be the best and to keep on excelling, then there also has to be that knowing that you are always going to be learning.
Right.
There's you may know a ton and be able to teach it, but then you always will be the student.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, like, but also there's like this kind of discernment, like, do I want to learn that? Is that really, do I need to learn that?
Yeah. I remember before I was even doing bodywork, my background was in technology, and I was very interested in a lot of different things, and I had hobbies. And one of my bosses basically said, like, pick a path, like, pick one. You're doing all these different things, like, pick one and go with it. And it's not that, I think actually the answer is in between sort of that, but it is very much that and especially every year new things come out. It's like, oh, I could do this training and I could do this training, and they're all going to be great. They're all going to be wonderful. You're going to learn something. Even, I would say, even trainings that you absolutely hate and you'll never do, you learn something from, so you'll learn something through everything. But is that what best serves you and your attention and your work? And sort of, how do you narrow it down? Because, like you were saying, Nikki, I think of the quote that's often attributed to Einstein. I don't know if it really was him, but the more you know, the more you don't know, right? So we keep going down and the path keeps opening bigger and bigger. And discernment is, as a yogi, discernment is sort of part of my training. Is part of yoga is discernment, viveka. So it is becoming about that, of knowing which path to go, which paths to plural, instead of, like, which three instead of which five.
Yeah, I think that's wise. There's only so many things you can really master in a lifetime. I think, it's hard. Our world is so complex now, especially, but I think that's one of the reasons that I recommitted to Rolfing, is that I didn't want to have the relationship that a psychotherapist had. That wasn't the relationship I wanted to have for my work with people. And I also realized that there's to not just be a dabbler, you have to really commit to that in the same way that in order to be an excellent Rolfing practitioner, you have to commit to that. So I think that helped me to make my decision. Like, I was trying to, I thought, I can marry these things. I can blend them together and come out with something maybe better than either one on its own. And I don't know. I don't know if I could have or if I couldn't have, but I realized that wasn't, where I'm guessing I couldn't have. You know, and that's out of respect for the, you know, the distinct fields that exist.
I think it's a common, from talking to people, I mean, we are all existing within our own realities. So everything that we know is what makes up our reality. And we see something and we learn something and we think, of course, this makes more sense because I know it and it's existing within my field. So why wouldn't it go in? And there is that, I think, that sense that we all think we can do it better in some way. I mean, not we all, but there's a part of that. I don't know if we really can. And I think also, like I was saying before, like just accepting the work and doing it.
Yeah. But I think that's what you're describing is a phenomena that I think goes with a certain stage of life too. Mm. You know, it's like, it's a creative impulse and, you know, to try and make something better. Mm. You know, when I was getting interested in somatic psychology, I was like completely convinced that like Rolfing had left this on the curb, you know, miles back, you know, or never picked it up in the first place, you know, and I thought, this is it. This is the shit right here, you know, and.
Well, you're kind of speaking to what Ida was hoping, right?
Yeah, maybe.
She in her lifetime really could like get a hold of the structural physical part, but then right. There was that whole element of the psychosomatic, where I agree that what the beauty of Rolfing is that it's brilliant in its own, but it can be so broad that people can kind of take it and bring it into their own creative flavor. I still feel that it would, and of course it could be a continuing education. I think it would be enrich the training and just kind of hold that point of differentiation for the Roth Institute if we had a little bit of the somatic psychology component ingrained.
I think it could be very orienting. You know, it could help people orient to what, even if you don't, just to know about it a little bit, even if you don't, you know, even if you're not learning skills per se, I think it can be orienting.
Well, and you said it in the very beginning, which I resonate greatly with, is that, you know, when you're holding and touching, you're touching way more than their structure, and we I think we know that in the training, but we have so much support of like-minded people, other students, and then
right.
People who are coming to the clinic are often curious and just, you know, we have that container and that support. And again, from being in the teaching role and keeping in touch with a lot of the students that have come through, and I think maybe the nature of my personality, I would get calls and people were like, Nikki, what is this? It's like, I can tell you a little bit about it, but that's a whole nother modality that, you know, either you got to go train or be uncomfortable and get comfortable with managing it to your best ability, or be like, hey, this is, and I actually had to do that to 2 clients, to be like, this is something way beyond my scope. I hear some great psychotherapists. I knew more Jungian at the time. I was like, give them the call.
Yeah, isn't that a great feeling to be able to to tell somebody that it's not, you know, that it's not in your wheelhouse. I mean,
yeah, and a little bit it was because I wasn't prepared. I was outside of my scope, and I was uncomfortable. It felt a lot for me to take on, and I just knew that that was the threshold of my where I could hold a container. I'm a crier. I could easily like dab into empathy and be like, oh, I feel that too. And so I have to hold that edge pretty strongly with my work. But but I mean, maybe I'm speaking to my own personal edge, that I think that would have been awesome to have early on in the training.
I hear you. Yeah, I concur. Yeah.
Well, what I'd say is I think, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, we could talk for ages because you're so easy to talk to. But we do also want to respect your time, and we do also want to respect the time of people listening in once the edit.
You
comes
bet.
down.
Yeah, I hope you can cut out whatever you need to.
No.
Just going on and on.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time.
Oh, you're welcome.
And
I've got a lot of time these days. Anyway, we'll talk to you later.
We'll talk later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to us at Touching into Presence. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. You can find out more about Russell at rolfingworks.com and stolzoffsportworks.com. Please feel free to leave us positive reviews on Apple Podcast or other podcast aggregators, and please share us with people you feel may be of interest. We're doing this for all of you out there and hope we're making a difference in your worlds. We look forward to hearing back from you and seeing you in our next conversation at Touching into Presence. Bye-bye.